there's a lot of psychological research that identifies what are the characteristics of groups that make them ineffective or make them make bad decisions.
So it seems like there has to be this constant tension between the individual and the collective in order to maintain a sort of healthy balance. And I wonder if you think, Keith, that this relationship between the individual and society has been evolving for the last few thousand years of human history, and do you think that we've arrived at a state now with the sort of, in at least the democratic nations, of having found a governing system that does balance the individual and the society well? Or do you think that, say, for example, in America, we've fallen too heavily into this sort of individualism, where we've ignored the group welfare to a certain extent? Or do you see the evolution continuing? Or
that's an interesting question. I haven't thought much about that. I certainly haven't written about it. I guess I would call that a question about, or that would be a debate about what's the optimal human social form.
Right.
A sort of traditional topic, I guess, in political science. And I view myself as someone engaged in describing what actually exists. I'm a social scientist, so I look at what is there, and I haven't thought so much about what should be,
right,
or morally, let's say, or ethically. But based on my research, and I've studied collaborating groups today, active theater groups, for example, and then I've gone back through history, and I've gone back at least as far as the 19th century to look at how famous inventions emerge. And I see the same human organizational forms underway, whether it's the 19th century or whether it's today. In the mid-19th century, it took Samuel Morse 14 years to come up with all of the pieces of information and meet all of the other people that he needed to make the telegraph successful. 14 years. There were 3 years where he made no progress because he had a problem in electricity that he didn't know the solution to. And there was a physicist just down the road in New York City who actually had the solution. But Morse had to sort of stumble around for 3 years until he accidentally met someone who knew this guy, who put them in touch. Whereas nowadays you would just go on Google and in 30 seconds you would find that guy. So I think basically the process of collaboration over time among people, it hasn't changed, at least in the past 200 years, but it certainly has speeded up. With computer technology and communication technology, it's speeded up substantially.
Right. So, well, I mean, I think back to ancient Athens, where you have Socrates seems to be the first one thinking for himself in a society that had been largely determined by habit and custom, and that seemed to have been like a watershed moment where for the first time individuals were awakening to their own ability to ask questions about religion and the sort of state institutions that had been set up and that people took for granted. And it seems like since that time, the tension between the individual and society has just been increasing and increasing. I guess sometimes I wonder if it's really that easy to separate our scientific study or descriptive study of what is from what ought to be. Is it hard to sort of compartmentalize in that sense? I mean, because it doesn't seem like we're always inevitably going to be coming from a certain moral perspective ourselves, even if we are scientists.
Absolutely. So I have my own opinions about which the challenge is that we come from a certain unique sort of culture in the United States. If you look at a spectrum of all the world's cultures, anthropologists have identified a dimension along which cultures vary, and the terms they would use would be at one end of the dimension would be individualist cultures, and at the other end of the dimension would be collectivist cultures. And they don't mean collectivist as in Joseph Stalin and collectivizing all the farms.
Mm-hmm.
By collectivist, it refers to a certain frame of mind that people have about their own sense of personal identity.
Right.
How do I define who I am as a person? And in individualist cultures, the United States generally being acknowledged to be at the far extreme of the most individualist cultures, we tend to think that as a person, my personhood ends at my skin, and everything on the other side of my skin is not me. Right. Whereas in collectivist cultures, it's a much more diffuse and distributed notion of what the self is, what the person is, which is much more embedded, much more networked. So a big part of who I am is what family I'm a member of, or what school I graduated from, or what town I'm from, or where I live. And throughout history, many more cultures have been collectivist than individualist. So the individualist type of culture is relatively recent, and you're probably right. Maybe we could trace it back to classic Greece. And now that I'm a member of this culture in the United States, it would be hard for me to imagine living in a collectivist culture. You can't change your fundamental way of thinking about people so quickly when you move to another country. Right. But there has been a lot of interest in creativity in Asian countries. Just 2 days ago, I learned about a book, and this was from a colleague of mine in Singapore, a book written by a Chinese person in Singapore. And the title of the book is Why Asians Are Less Creative Than Westerners.
Oh, wow.
And this is by an Asian person. So I haven't read the book.
Yeah.
I know that people in China and other Asian countries are concerned that they are perhaps not as creative as the United States. And that's a big issue for discussion at the highest levels of government. So I guess, again, I'm changing your question from a more general one about political organization to one that's about creativity specifically. But so you're right, the research has all sorts of implications for how you might choose to make a nation or a country or a culture more creative.
Right.
And most countries today want their countries and their economies to be more creative. So absolutely, there are unavoidable implications.
Certainly.
It's interesting in the U.S. how we're kind of collectively agreeing that there's more of an individualist impetus driving the whole thing, and then we also identify collectively as one kind of unit. So there is a subtle collectivism in there, but it's under this Superman shirt of I'm an individual, right? Yeah. And our system has found a way to kind of capitalize on that, and I think we're seeing the tail end of it. And being in a place like San Francisco at this time, just going out and talking with people, reading your book and using some of the principles in your book at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I got to experience the power of group genius firsthand. And we made a project, we put it up on the network. But we didn't go into it, we had to sacrifice a lot of ego, a lot of self-personality, what I wanted to. Everybody had to sacrifice the director role, and then kind of a little bit, so we all became directors, and we kind of bounced off each other. And it was one of the, I don't know, it's probably my favorite class of all time. It was a week intensive, and it was structured around the power of group genius and collaborative process philosophy rather than product philosophy. So I was wondering how much group genius focuses on process, more in the doing rather than the finished product and getting the outcome. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, Keith.
It's all about the process, absolutely.
Okay.
Especially when you look at an improvisational theater performance up on stage. The ensemble is there in the moment, right? And it's all about the process among the actors on the stage. That's what the audience is there to watch. They're there to watch the process. There's no product at the end.
Yeah.
In contrast to, the product is the performance, but in contrast to, say, a team in a work organization where, we're a team at Google and we're working on a new version of Gmail or something. So there is a product at the end. It's going to be the next release of Gmail. Whereas in improvised performance, you don't have a product at the end. The performance is the product, or the process is all. The process is all there is. Mm-hmm. So what you get when you look at this kind of collaboration is you get a really pure form of creative process.
Okay.
So I'm wondering...